Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my second part of my January wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below, and the first book I finished in the second part of the month was Light for the World to See, 1,000 Words on Race and Hope by Kwame Alexander. So this is pretty much exactly what the title makes it sound like. It's a very short piece about the state of the United States and about racism in the US, and like the subtitle suggests, it does include some hope in addition to a lot of hurt and very justified anger. And I am so glad that I saw Ashley from Bookish Realm talk about this book. She's the one who really put it on my radar, and I actually got my library hold in because I did listen to this on audiobook and it is narrated by the author. I got my library hold in on January 19th, and I decided to listen to it the next day on the 20th, which was Inauguration Day, and I am really glad I did. I think this was the really perfect combination of, again, hope for the future while also acknowledging the pain of the past and of the present, and honestly of the future as well, because it's not like everything is going to instantly get better, but I do think that this is a piece that combines those things. So it is very honest, it is very raw about the horrible things that have happened in the past and the hard work that we still have to do, but there is some hope as well. And I listened to this, and then after that I watched and listened to Amanda Gorman's performance of The Hill We Climb, which I'm sure you have probably already seen, but I am going to link that down below just in case you haven't seen the whole thing yet, because it is absolutely gorgeous, and I think that that's another piece that really combines that honesty and that hurt with some hope and with some belief that we can make things better. And I think both of those things are important, and I think that these two pieces paired really well together. And I don't really know how to talk about Light for the World to See except to say that it was fantastically written. Listening to it read by the author was extremely powerful, and I think a really good way to listen to it. Again, I'm somebody who doesn't do a lot of audiobooks, but I'm really glad that I did this one, and I will just direct you again to Ashley's channel because she talked about this so beautifully, and I just really thought it was brilliant. And again, I'm really glad that I listened to it at the time that I did, and I gave Light for the World to See 5 stars. The next book I finished was Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a very well-known book, and believe it or not, this was my first Jacqueline Woodson book. I am so glad I finally started reading her work, and this is it's a nonfiction book in verse, which is not something I have ever read before. I've only read novels in verse before, and I thought this was absolutely brilliant. A lot of people talk about how great this book is, so this is not a surprise or anything, but I also thought this was beautiful. I thought this was such an incredible book. Jacqueline Woodson talks about her childhood and growing up during the 60s. I think she was born, let's see. Yeah, she was born in 1963, and it talks about, like, she lived in New York, but she also spent a lot of her life growing up in the South with her grandparents, and this is just a book about her life, about her family, about growing up, about the civil rights movement in a sense. It's definitely very situated in the civil rights era, but something I thought was really interesting about this book is I think that Jacqueline Woodson did a really good job of writing from the perspective of her younger self in a way that made very clear some of the things that were going on, while also allowing herself to to be a kid as well, and to think about the things that kids would think about. Like, it's not like every single thought she had revolved around what it was like to grow up during the civil rights movement. I think that was definitely a strong element of this book, and I think that was like really well incorporated into the book. But she also talks about things like friendships and like her relationship with her family and like other things. Like, they're definitely affected by the time period she grew up in, and by the fact that she was a Black girl coming of age in the South for a big part of this book, and even elsewhere in the country. That is definitely going to affect the way she grew up. But I think that this book also made clear that there is more to her story than that, and I thought that balance was really interesting. I thought the writing of this was absolutely beautiful. Like, this isn't the kind of poetry that has a lot of like overwrought descriptions, which I can enjoy some poems like that as well, but this isn't that kind of poetry, but it is still one of the most beautiful poetry styles I have read. Like, I think it looks simple, but it's really not, because she always chooses the exact right word. She communicates feelings and people and places so beautifully in so few words, but they are the perfect words. And I think, I mean, honestly, that's kind of what poets are trying to do, is, you know, use the exact right word every time. But I think Jacqueline Woodson is such a good example of that, and it's such a rich language as well. Like, I don't want it to sound like it's simplistic in the sense that there's no beauty to the language, or that that she's like talking down to her audience, because she's absolutely not. Like, there is such depth here, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I think this is also a good book for if you're nervous about poetry, if you're nervous about like novels in verse, if you're nervous about nonfiction, like any of those things. I think this would be a fantastic book to kind of dip your toes into, because it is so approachable, while also being such a beautiful example of all of those things. Although again, it's not a novel in verse because it is nonfiction, it's like a memoir, but I just think it's a really beautiful example of those three things. So I think that if you're worried about getting into those, this would be a great pick, in addition to just being a great pick for like readers in general. I also, the edition that I had, it says on the cover here, new content inside, and the back of the book included a few poems by Jacqueline Woodson that were newer, and just put into this newer edition. And I am really glad that I had that one, because I really loved those poems. And yeah, I can't say enough wonderful things about this book. This is definitely not going to be the last Jacqueline Woodson book I've read. I'm so glad I'm finally reading her work. And to quote from my own very short Goodreads review, I am late to the Jacqueline Woodson party, but I am here and I am grateful. And I obviously gave Brown Girl Dreaming 5 stars. Next, I finished Madam Will You Talk by Mary Stewart. And this was a buddy read with my friend Mary Margaret from MM's Musings. All the people I mentioned will be linked down below, as always, as well as content warnings for all of the books that I talk about. And Mary Stewart is one of Mary Margaret's favorite authors, so I was really excited to buddy read this with her, and I really enjoyed it. This is a romantic suspense novel, which I don't think is a genre I have ever read anything from before, and Mary Stewart was writing in, let's see, this book was published in 1955, and I believe it was her first novel, so I think like 50s and on is when she was writing. And like I said, I just really enjoyed this. We're following our main character Charity, and she is on vacation in Avignon, France, and while she is there, she ends up meeting some people and getting kind of caught up in this like exciting chase and mystery, and these like family secrets that are going on, like not her family, but like a different family, and she ends up becoming a much more active participant in these than she planned to, and so we're following her on these like adventures and kind of like figuring out this mystery of like what's going on as she travels around Avignon. I don't think that was a better summary, but anyway, so I really liked this. Charity was a likable main character. I think she was very practical and competent, and even if she made some like interesting decisions sometimes, I think that they were believable, and she wasn't like frustrating or anything. Like, I really liked too how active a part she had in this story, and how actively she was involved in the actual like events or conflict, or like attempting to resolve the conflict. Like, even though this was written in the 50s, I don't feel like she was just like a bystander while all of the male characters like took care of everything. So I really liked that. I also really enjoyed the writing. Also, because this is romantic suspense, there is of course a romance element, and I was actually pleasantly surprised by that. Definitely not my favorite love interest, and there's still some things about it where I think it could have been done a little bit better, but I actually didn't mind it. Also, there's a young kid character in this book named David who has a like somewhat prominent role, especially in some parts of the book, and I actually thought he was written really well. I think sometimes because I read so much middle grade, and I love middle grade so much, that I have very little patience for adult books that write kid characters badly, or that write them as like set pieces to kind of move along the story for the adults. So I really liked the way that David was characterized. I think that was done really well. He felt like a very believable kid, while also being like understandably affected by the way, like the things that have happened in his life, because he's had to deal with some pretty upsetting or dark things. So I think that he was a believable kid, and he also didn't come off as like really annoying, which can also happen sometimes in adult books that have young kids in them. So I really liked him, and I was just like super compelled by this book. Like, Mary Margaret had told me that there's like usually a part in Mary Stewart books about like halfway through or like 2/3 through where like you just can't stop reading, you have to get to the end, and sure enough, that's what happened. I like flew through that last part of the book especially. Like, I just really enjoyed this. There were a couple of things I didn't love. One is, even though I enjoyed the writing and the setting, I think sometimes Mary Stewart got a little bit too caught up in these like very minute descriptions of the specific scenery and locations that Charity was going to in Avignon, and I'm sure that if that's an area that you have a particular interest in, those would be great for you. But for me, they just felt like a little much, although there were a couple of scene descriptions that I really enjoyed. Like, there's one at, I think it's like one of the temples, it's like a temple of Artemis or something that was just really beautifully described, but there were some of the others that felt a little over the top to me. And then my other thing is I think the ending happened a little too fast. There were some things that I think we should have spent more time on, and that I also would have liked Charity to be a little more involved in the final kind of conflict thing, which again, I really liked how active she was throughout the book, so I was a little disappointed. I would have liked her to have a bigger role there. Okay, so obviously I am filming this part on a different day, but I forgot to mention something I wanted to for this review that I thought was significant enough that I wanted to actually like film another clip. One thing that I tend to be very picky with in books or media in general is when they take a real historical event, especially if that's a famous tragedy, and they use it as like a plot twist or like a plot reveal. Like basically if they like tie the plot of their story too much into that real historical thing. I tend to be very picky about that. I often feel like it cheapens the actual history, but I did want to mention that even though this book did that a little bit, I do think that Mary Stuart handled it relatively well, like a lot better than a lot of other stories I have seen. Like I would have preferred that plot element to be something else, but it wasn't done terribly, I don't think. But overall, I really liked this. I also want to mention, like, I talked about the car chase aspect when I was summarizing this book, or attempting to, and I don't usually like car chases. Like, I don't care about them at all. I find them super boring, but I actually really like the way they were done here. I think that Mary Stuart did a great job of communicating the excitement. There's one in particular that, like, near the end of the book that is like a very, I think, interesting take, but anyway, I really liked that, and I think that even if that's not something you enjoy, you might still like this book, because again, I don't tend to like those, but I liked them here. So anyway, very happy with my first Mary Stuart book. I gave Madam Will You Talk 4 stars, and I'm definitely excited to read more of her books. This also felt like kind of a cozy book in some ways, even though again there's like some action stuff happening and there's some like dark secrets and everything. Something about the writing style just felt kind of cozy, even though all of those things were going on. So yeah, really enjoyed that. Next, I finished The House of 100 Clocks by A.M. Howell. This book is set in 1905 in England, and we follow our main character Helena, and she has a pet parrot named Orbit, and her father is a clockwinder, and Helena is really struggling after the recent death of her mother, and his father is struggling with this loss as well, and they end up moving to Cambridge when her father gets appointed as clockwinder to this really wealthy man, and they get there and it's this massive house and it's completely full of clocks, like hundreds and hundreds of clocks, and Helena and her father are told that if the clocks ever stop, if any of the clocks ever stop, then this man who owns the house and who has hired her father will be able to take all of their possessions away, and that includes Helena's pet Orbit. So she's really upset about that because it's really one of her only connections to her mother, because it was her mother's pet, and he can kind of imitate her voice, and so in addition to just not wanting to lose all of the things they own, Helena is really worried about this happening. And so from pretty early on there are some strange things happening in this house, and Helena is trying to figure out what's going on, like why these clocks are so important, like why they must never stop ticking, and like what's going on here. And I was sadly pretty disappointed in this book, but I think at least part of it is my own fault, because of my expectations. If I have like a feeling about a book that I don't know a lot about, but I feel like I'm gonna love it, I feel like I'm usually pretty good at being right about those, which was how I went into this one, with that feeling, and sadly, I was disappointed. I did not love this one, but I will talk about the things I liked. So I thought the concept for this book was really interesting. I think the setting was very interesting. Like this creepy mansion, like full of clocks, and trying to figure out why it's so important that these clocks never stop. I thought that was a very interesting idea. Unfortunately though, a lot of other things about this book just fell very flat for me. Like the characters, I did not really feel a connection to them. Like Helena was fine, but she made some frustrating choices sometimes, and just like in general, this could be a very frustrating book at times. Like some of the events that kind of set off the plot of this book are, again, like, sorry to keep using that same word, but they were very frustrating. Like especially some of the actions of Helena's father, where it's like, you are an adult and you should know better than to do something like this. And like I feel like if you're one of those readers who, when you read middle grade, like you have to be really sold on the idea of why kids would be involved in something rather than the adults. I feel like you would be even more annoyed by that part of this book, because like that's not something that I am generally super picky about, but like even as I was reading this, I was like feeling very annoyed by that. And like I said, just the characters in general, like there are a couple of friendships that Helena develops that I felt were very flat, very underdeveloped. Their characters were not, again, like not developed very much. I think that the resolution of this book happened too easily. Like I think some characters were forgiven for things too easily, or like I think that just the explanations for things in this book in general were done in a way that was not super supported. Hey guys, so editing Kara here. I went to go edit that video and found that some of the footage had like gotten corrupted or something had happened to it. And I'm gonna have to just like redo a little bit, and I'm kind of sad because one of the books where I just like completely lost basically all of the review was one of my favorites. So anyway, I'm gonna finish up the last book I was talking about and then just try and remember what I was saying about the other book when I filmed that I think a few weeks ago. At this point I do have my notes, and this is gonna be much less formal, probably much less polished, and I apologize for that. Probably the sound is not as great too. I just like, I've had a really bad day and I could not face like having to actually like do my whole setup again. So I'm very sorry about this, but it'll only be for a couple books and then we will be back to normal wrap-up situation. So I think I was talking about The House of 100 Clocks by A.M. Howell, and I was almost at the end of this review. Basically, I was pretty disappointed. I think I was talking about the characters not being very well developed, including our main character. I thought the friendships were not very good either. Like, they just didn't feel like they had a lot of depth to them, and that was true for most of the characters, really. I did find Helena's connection to her mother through her bird Orbit. I did find that very touching, but like overall, the relationships, like the character relationships, were not done very well in my opinion. And then I was also talking about the ending of the book and how that felt like kind of a cop-out, or not a cop-out, but there were aspects of it that I think were brushed off, or that were explained too easily, or like justified too easily. Like, I think some characters got off much easier than they should have, and I think there were maybe some good ideas there or some interesting ideas there, but the way they were handled just fell really flat. Yeah, so I was really disappointed in this one. Again, I had built this up in my head, so part of it I think is my own expectations, but I did just feel like most of the elements in this book were really lacking, and I gave The House of 100 Clocks 3 stars. And then sadly, the book that I lost almost the whole review for, so I pretty much have to start over, is Touch of Power by Maria V. Snyder, and I'm sad because I really enjoyed this one, so hopefully I can communicate why that was. Again, hopefully I can communicate that again. And this was a present from my lovely friend Huck from Bad to Read, so thank you so much. And like I said, I really enjoyed this. So in this book, we are following our main character, who is a healer, and her name is Avery, and she's in hiding because healers now are outlawed and they're being hunted down. Basically, if they're found, they get executed because the people of these kingdoms blame them for a plague that happened several years before, and Avery is in hiding, and so she's kind of been moving from town to town, trying to keep a low profile, but at the beginning of this book she gets caught, but she ends up getting rescued / kidnapped by this group of people, and what they want from her is for her to come with them and to heal a prince. But this is very complicated for Avery because she's not so sure she wants to do this, because this prince is actually responsible for what happened to Avery's people, like to all of these healers. So Avery's pretty conflicted about that, but she does end up going along with them. So this band of characters is trying to convince Avery, and they end up traveling together. And also the way that healing works in this book is healers take in the illness or the injury or whatever it is that they're healing somebody from, they take that into themselves. So they kind of like experience it themselves, but they heal at a much faster rate. So like that's how the healing magic works. And as I've said, I really enjoyed this. I really liked Avery as a main character. I really liked too that she had a very strong moral compass, and like she was always very clear about like she was going to make the decision of who she wanted to heal based on what she believed was right. Like, these are her powers and she's the one doing the healing, and so she gets to make that call. And I really admired that, and doing the right thing and healing somebody even if it wasn't the most politically savvy thing to do, or you know, healing someone even if it meant losing a bargaining chip and things like that. Like, the way that she viewed her healing and her ethical commitment, I just really admired, and I really liked that. I also really liked the story of this book, like the plot. I forgot to mention this in the summary, but like there's also this element of mystery almost, because Avery is starting to put together the pieces about what actually happened with this plague and where it came from, and I found that really interesting. And I also even liked the journey elements of this book, which we know I'm a very hard sell on journey books, but I really liked this one. I found it very engaging still, and I think that was because the stops, or like the events that happened along the way, were interesting, and also because I really liked this group of characters. And that was another thing. So Avery is traveling with this group of men, and I have found in this book and also in Poison Study that Maria V. Snyder is really good at like even when she's telling a story where it's a lot of guys and one girl, she doesn't do it in a way that is stereotypical, or like Avery's character is not just reduced to like the chick, you know, like she's still like, it didn't feel like that. I don't really know how else to explain it, so hopefully that makes sense. But I just really enjoyed like all of these main characters. I also really liked the romance. It's like very slow build, and I could see some people maybe feeling like it wasn't prominent enough, or like it wasn't like there wasn't enough time spent on it, but I really liked how subtle it was, and I still think it made sense, and I just really enjoyed that aspect of the book. I also thought the magic was really interesting. I mentioned how the healing magic worked, and I thought that was just a very interesting part of the book. And something else I want to mention that like I thought was really interesting and well done is like, so one of the antagonists of this book, because of the way that their magic reacts with Avery's, like this antagonist can kind of like force Avery to feel attraction and to like respond like when this character kisses her. And I think that the way those scenes were written, the book did a really good job of showing how just because Avery was attracted to this person does not mean she was consenting to this. Like I just think that was a really interesting thing to show in a fantasy book, and I really liked that, like to show in a fantasy setting the difference between like arousal or attraction and like actually consenting. Like you were in Avery's head, and even as she was being controlled to do something or to want something, it was very clear that she did not actually want it. And like this wasn't like a prominent focus of the book or anything, but that was just something that came up that I thought was really well done. So I really enjoyed this book overall. There were a couple of like writing or story things, just like small things, that kept this from being like a perfect book for me, but overall I really liked this, and I gave A Touch of Power 4 stars. Next I finished The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman. This was our Past Classics pick for January, and I was the host for the live show, so I will link that down below. And this is a play that is kind of like the way I've always learned about it in classes and things and heard about it, is it's kind of like one of the like cornerstones of early queer theater. This is a play about two friends, Karen and Martha, who run a girls' boarding school together, and the conflict of this play gets set off when a student, as a way to kind of get revenge for what she perceives as her unfair treatment by these teachers, and also to just get out of doing things that she doesn't want to do, she spreads a lie about these two teachers. And specifically the lie that she spreads is that they are involved together. And of course, this being set in, I think it's the 1930s. So this being set in the 1930s, this is cause for a lot of anger and outrage and disgust. And essentially this lie leads to the ruin of these two women's lives and livelihoods. And yeah, so that's kind of what the play is about. Again, we have a whole live show on this where we go really in depth on our thoughts, but basically, none of us really liked this or enjoyed this. Our consensus was this is one of those works where for the day it was very progressive, but reading it now there is a lot wrong with it. There's a lot of really problematic material here. And another thing is like this is not really a play about lesbians. And the playwright even says that in the introduction to this edition. Like the play is about a lie, and it's kind of, it happens to be about these teachers being gay. And so it's not even, so like even the focus of the play is not really on queer characters. So that was also a disappointment. That part was just kind of incidental. I did think the writing of this play was good, and there are a couple of really great speeches in it, but like overall I did not really like a lot of things about this. Again, there's some very problematic material here. This was just generally very unpleasant and frustrating to read, and I do get that. I think to an extent it's supposed to be like you're supposed to be very upset watching these women's lives fall apart because of the homophobia in their community, which was triggered by this child's story. So I think that some of it is supposed to be very difficult, but I don't think that was balanced by enough like thematic effectiveness. Also, like Mary, the young girl, is just an absolute monster, and it was just very unpleasant to read like any of the scenes with her in them, and she was in a lot. That was another criticism I have for this play, is that it doesn't, like, you kind of assume that the main characters would be these two women, but I feel like Karen and Martha are not in enough scenes to make them feel like main characters. I don't know, this play almost feels like it's one without main characters, and I think that considering the emotional weight of this piece, there should have been more time spent on developing these characters or on like getting to know them, and there just wasn't. And like the ending of this play is just really bad, and that plays into some of those issues with the representation that I mentioned earlier. It's, yeah, like, again, please check content warnings if you are at all, like, wondering, if you're at all concerned, because there are some pretty intense ones. And yeah, bottom line, I think that this play still has value as like a historical piece. And again, I think that for the time it was written in, this was a really important play, because just to like even have a discussion about characters being gay was like pretty revolutionary. And there are a few stereotypes that this play subverts, which was really nice to see. But in general, it's like, as a classroom study, I think you could still like use this play for some things today. But if you were like wanting to put on a production that talks about the queer experience, or that like shows support for gay characters or gay people, or any kind of positive uplifting of stories about gay characters or issues, I think there are a lot better options than this one, and I gave The Children's Hour 2 stars. And finally, the last book I read in January was Into the Heartless Wood by Joanna Ruth Meyer, and this is a kind of fairy tale retelling, although it does some other things as well. The pitch that Joanna Ruth Meyer always gives, and that I mentioned in my anticipated releases video, is that the first part is kind of like a gender-swapped Beauty and the Beast retelling, but the second part is more like a Little Mermaid retelling if the Little Mermaid were a murderous tree, which is just such an interesting concept. And so in this book we follow two main characters, and they are Saren and Owen, and Saren is a tree siren. And she and her sisters they live in this wood, and they always, when people come into their wood, they take their hearts and they kill them, which is what their mother orders them to do. And they always kill the people who come into their forest. And then Owen lives with his father and his baby sister pretty close to the wood, and they have a telescope. Like Owen's father, and he also helps him with this, is kind of like the royal astronomer, so he will make star charts, he'll record the positions of the planets and stars and things like that. And then the sirens in the wood, it seems like they're also getting more dangerous, because they're starting to attack people. Like the forest actually grows, and like they're starting to be able to attack people in a larger and larger area. And one day Owen is traveling on a train when they are attacked, and everybody else on this train is killed. But for some reason Saren saves his life, and she doesn't really know why she does this either, so he actually escapes. And it does, like, there have been occasionally stories about people being rescued from the wood. It does sometimes happen, but overall you're pretty much doomed if you if you go into the wood, or if you're attacked by these sirens. So it's pretty amazing that Owen survived this. And Owen and Saren are both trying to figure out why this happened, which I feel like that could have been a very annoying element, but I actually didn't mind it here, because I did truly believe that Owen and Saren were trying to understand why this happened. Like, it didn't just feel like, oh, well, basically you guys are in love already, so that's why she saved him. Even though they do develop a relationship later, it definitely felt believable. Like this like confusion, and like Saren trying to figure out like why she would save this one person when she never did that with anybody else. So anyway, that happens, and then Owen and Saren, like Owen keeps coming to see her, and they do end up kind of developing this relationship. But Saren, as she becomes more and more interested in Owen, and more interested in humans in general, and kind of wanting to be human, she gets afraid of what will happen if Owen ever finds out what she has done in the past, like what she normally does to the people that her mother tells her to kill. And then later in the book there's some more kind of like larger scale conflict, and I think like the dust jacket kind of tells you what it is, but I don't know, I consider that kind of a spoiler because it doesn't happen until pretty far into the book, so I'm not going to talk about what that is. But yeah, there's like other things that come up in the story as well. And I liked this. I did not love it as much as I was maybe hoping to, but I did enjoy this, and it makes me happy because I own a couple of other books by Joanna Ruth Meyer, so I'm glad to know that I do actually enjoy her work. I really enjoyed the writing of this book. It's very lovely, but not overly poetic or like overwritten or anything, which I really appreciated. And I also read this very quickly, and I think part of that is because Saren's chapters, especially early on, are told in a way where there's a lot of line breaks, because it's kind of like communicating the way that, because she's essentially a tree, or a tree siren, she thinks about things differently. And so I think some of the fact that I read this book so quickly is due to just like spacing of her chapters, but I do also think that the writing flowed very well. It felt very smooth. Yeah, I forgot to mention that when I was saying Saren is a tree siren, like she literally used to be a tree before her mother, or like the witch of the wood, like turned her into an actual tree siren. I also really liked the ideas of this book, like this wood and these tree sirens I thought were really interesting. I liked the beginning and the end of this story. Like, there's some stuff in the middle that I'll get to that I wasn't as much a fan of. I liked our two main characters. I enjoyed Saren and Owen. Like, Owen is just so kind and good, and I really liked him, and I thought Saren was very interesting as well. However, there were some things that I didn't like as much, or that didn't work as well for me, and sadly one of them is the central relationship between Saren and Owen. I liked both their characters, like I liked them individually, but I felt like the progression of their romance was like, not even that it happened too quick, but I feel like we skipped parts that we shouldn't have skipped. Like, I would have liked to see more scenes of them like having conversations and like getting to know each other, and like they have some really great moments and like some really like romantic moments together, and it's not exactly that their relationship developed too quickly, because I think it makes sense why they would connect to each other, but I just feel like we were missing some important development bits of their relationship. So that was something that I wanted more from. Actually, I just looked down at my notes and I had written quick romance, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe it actually did feel too fast to me, but like I remember that the biggest takeaway I had, or the biggest thing that I wanted from their romance that I didn't get, is just wanting to see more from them. I also really didn't end up liking the big conflict, like the political stuff that comes in like 2/3 of the way into the book, I think. Like, it just, I don't know, it felt very odd. It led to some scenes that felt very odd, like some like battle scenes that I just don't, I don't know, I don't feel like it fit with the rest of the story. And the conflict was also just something that I didn't find very interesting. I do like that there's like a change of setting partway through the book that I was not sure how I was going to feel about, but I actually really liked some of those scenes, so that was nice. But the big conflict that comes in later in the book, I was just not the biggest fan of. I also I don't know, I felt kind of emotionally distant from this story while I was reading it. Like I've said, I did enjoy the characters, but I just didn't, I didn't connect to this book the way I was maybe hoping to. Although I will say that the very end did get me. Like, I did tear up a little bit, so the ending at least I found emotionally effective. But for most of the rest of the book, I don't know, I felt kind of separated from it, and I think part of it was because so much of this story depended on you getting very invested in this central relationship, and again, that wasn't something that I really had. So I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place with this book, so I didn't know what to expect from this book, and somehow it was still different than what I expected. But overall, I did like this one. I gave Into the Heartless Wood 3.5 stars, and like I said, I am really excited to pick up Joanna Ruth Meyer's other books that I own, so I'm glad to know that I do like her writing and storytelling. Okay, everybody, so those are the rest of the books that I read in January. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!